I'd ask you to please rise and state our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Secretary, could you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Ferrucci.
Here.
Mr. Grinsley.
Here.
Mr. Stevenson.
Here.
And Mr. Fain.
Here.
Thank you.
We have our quorum for tonight's business. At this time, we would entertain a motion to approve our minutes from March 24th, 2021. Do we have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from March.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. So we'll move to our first order of business, which is case VA 21-12, Humane Society signage. Consideration of a development standards variance from section 6.17, signage standards of the Fishers UDO to allow the installation of building signage. The subject property is located at 10501 Hague Road, Fishers, 46038, and is approximately 8.55 acres and zoned PUD. The petitioner is Ken Woods of ISF Signs on behalf of the Humane Society. Is Mr. Woods here? Sir, would you approach the podium, state your name and your address, and please proceed with your petition.
My name is Ken Woods. I work for ISF Signs. Address is 8800 North Street here in Fishers.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so Humane Society, they're looking to add a fourth sign on their south elevation, which faces the main parking lot. But the first three signs over to your right, signs 1, 2, and 4, those signs are already permitted, and they're looking to add that fourth sign, S3, over on your left. When we go for the fourth sign, that's going to add 300 or 38 and a half square feet of area, sign area that goes and exceeds the 300 max you're allowed to have on any one facade. And a couple of reasons why we want to ask for the variance is the main door is over there by where the first three signs I mentioned that were already permitted. That's where the main entrance is. And so they want to get the fourth sign on the left side of the building because there's also a door there, and they want the traffic that goes into the Rebecca M. Stevens Education Center to funnel through that entrance. So those are kind of like the reasons why they want to get the sign. The reason they have the three signs over on the other side is because S1 is their sign for the building itself that identifies the Humane Society as being the occupants. Signs S2 and S4 are signs that recognize their two major donors. So that's why they're looking to get this fourth sign. Yeah, they feel like all those three signs are very imperative for what they do in their efforts. So that's why we're seeking the variance.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. If anyone would like to speak on this matter, please approach the podium, state your name, address, and proceed. Seeing no one at this time, I'd close the public hearing and like to hear from staff, please.
Good evening. For the record, Andrew McGee, I'm a planner here with the City of Fishers. As Ken stated, this is for the Humane Society for Hamilton County. So they are located at 10501 Hague Road. That's the southeast corner of 106 and Hague. You may have driven by there recently. They opened a few weeks ago in their new, I believe it was $12 million facility that they've got there. So here's a good overview of the site plan with the signs numbered. These are the same numbers that Ken was referring to earlier. So they have 3 signs today on the south facade of the building, which is their main facade. And they also have another sign on the west facade along the road, as well as a ground sign at the actual parking lot entrance. So we're here today because the UDO stipulates that there's a maximum per facade, and this is all based on the size of the building, but the upper limit is 3 signs per facade. So they have 3 today, and they're at that limit. They want to add a 4th sign. So that's one part to the variance is for the number of signs. But also, the UDO also has an upper limit of square footage, again, based on building size, but that upper limit is 300 square feet combined of all signs per facade. So today, with their 3 signs, they are below that number, but with the 4th sign they're requesting, that would take them over that limit as well. So the variance is for both the number of signs as well as the total square footage. So again, you can see on here the 3 signs that they already have on the right-hand side and the 4th sign that they're requesting there on the left. This is an image of that proposed 4th sign. Again, this is one of the donor signs. So a major component of funding this new building was donors and fundraising. And as such, they've recommended or recognized some of their donors with signage. They had been planning on having 4 signs during during this project, but they had not really had that. We really didn't have a discussion on signage until recently. And it was at the very last minute that they realized this 4th sign was not going to be able to be permitted, again, without a variance request. As stated earlier, Ken is correct. They really have 2 entrances on the front of this building. They have the main entrance on the east side of this facade, and then they have this entrance on the west. This entrance really is a separate entrance for their education center. One of the ways that the UDO is written today is this building with multiple entrances. If this side of the building were a different tenant, say they were leasing this out to another nonprofit or a different organization that wasn't under their ownership, they would be allowed a sign there. Because the UDO is not only written per facade, but also per tenant. But with the way that the Humane Society operates, they sort of have different components to this building. So, one of the signs does have a name for the Humane Society in general. So these are the 3 other signs. So they have a name for themselves. They've got a sign for the building as a whole, which is the Stephen Cage Foundation. And then they have a sign on the east side for the medical center. The 4th sign, again, would be recognizing kind of a different component of their operations, which is that education center that has a separate entrance. So staff is supportive of this request for a couple reasons. One, the way that the building is designed, again, if that was a different tenant or a different user of that western space, they would be allowed to have a sign. But they are effectively operating that way today, as the education center really is a separate portion of the Humane Society in general. And we're also supportive, again, because of the unique way that they funded this project and kind of the unique way that the building was built. We think it supports the additional sign that's being requested. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to help, or again, Ken is here as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Members of the board, any questions? Andrew, I have just a couple of questions. The large, I don't know if they're photographs or renderings of the animals. I guess there's a cat and a dog as you approach the building.
Yep.
How does that fit into a signage?
So those are not considered signs as far as the building is concerned. Typically, anything that is artwork that doesn't have an overt commercial aspect to it. So if it doesn't have commercial branding, if it doesn't have commercial colors, if it's just images or artwork, we don't typically consider that signage. That's a good question because that's something that's come to the board before. Staff didn't feel that was signage at the time when we did the initial review for the building. And then when it went to PUD committee for approval of the architecture, again, they don't approve signage as well. But the PUD committee didn't have any issues with it, and staff just determined that it was really an art element to the building rather than signage. If it had words on it or if it had a logo on it, that would have been a different story. Mm-hmm. But just the images, we really looked at that separately and said, that's not part of the signage. But that is a good question.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, at this time, entertain a motion, please.
I would just add one thing real
Oh,
quick.
sure.
Because of the unique nature of this specific business, we would ask that the variance request just run with the organization itself and not with the land.
Okay. Is the petitioner willing to accept that the variance would run with the business, and if the business is ultimately sold, that the variance would drop? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I forgot to bring that up.
I would make a motion that we approve V8-21-12 with the condition that the variance is with the business and not the land, and that the approval is recorded to the subject property.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Secretary, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Grinslake.
Approved.
Mr. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mr. Fain.
Yes.
And Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes, motion passes. Okay, our next order of business is case VA 21-13, 13431 Lake Ridge Lane. Consideration of a development standard variance from section 3.2.3B.5B of the R2 residential development standards to exceed the maximum impervious surface of 35% for site improvements. The subject property is located at 13431 Lake Ridge Lane, Fishers, 46055, directly on Geist Reservoir within the Springs of Cambridge, and is approximately 0.44 acres and zoned R2 residential. Our petitioner is Nick Gallagher of Carrington Homes. Is Mr. Gallagher here? Mr. Gallagher, would you state your name and your address, please, and proceed with your petition?
Nick Gallagher with Carrington Homes, 8250 North 600 West, McCordsville.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
So as you stated, we are contracted to build this home for John and Zoila Beauchamp. In this neighborhood, we have pool and porcelain paver decking, planned around the pool in the back of the property. Sidewalk and driveway, as you can see there. So we're just trying to seek a variance to be able to put that much hard surface in the project.
All right. At this time, I'd open the hearing to the public. Anyone from the public wish to speak on this matter? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and ask staff to present, please.
Good afternoon. So this is a very typical Springs of Cambridge request. One slight difference with this is the variance for impervious surface isn't only because of the proposed pool and hardscaping, but also the primary residence as well. So the primary residence and the driveway is or would be at 43% impervious surface. So just to build the primary residence, they would need a variance. And then in addition to that, an additional 8% for the proposed hardscaping and kind of rear yard area. So again, that doesn't really change the variance request, but it is slightly different than the normal ones that we get as to why we're here before you tonight. As usual with these, staff is supportive because they're right on Geist. If you run off, substantial amount of runoff from this property will go directly into Geist, and we would recommend approval.
Thank you. Members of the board, any questions? Okay, at this point, is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion, please, to approve VA-21-13 at Lake Ridge Lane.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Secretary?
Mr. Grinslake.
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mr. Fain.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Our next order of business is case VA 21-14, 13511 East 114th Street. Consideration of a development standards variance from section 6.2.2.B, residential accessory structures, height of the City of Fishers UDO to allow the construction of an accessory structure exceeding 18 feet in height. The subject property is located at 13511 East 114th Street, Fishers 46037, directly on Geist Reservoir, within the Country Lane Estates subdivision, which is approximately 6.45 acres and zoned R2 residential. Our petitioner is Joy Skidmore on behalf of F&M Real Estate Office LLC. Is Joy present?
She should be on the Teams.
Yes, I'm here virtually.
Thank you. And you are Joy Skidmore?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. We're going to go ahead and present your petition, please.
Okay. Again, I am Joy Skidmore with Single Source Real Estate Services, PO Box 91, Plainfield, Indiana 46168. Appreciate the board hearing our variances this evening. There are two variances on the agenda for this property. So the first, as you stated, is the development standards variance. And I'm getting my presentation. So the proposed variance is to allow a building height up to 22 feet, 4 feet above the allowable accessory structure height of 18 feet. And this is simply to match the existing architecture and the existing primary structure on the property. So that is the reason that we're here requesting this variance. The proposed roof pitch is consistent with the primary architecture of the primary residence on the site, which is as listed in the staff report. So this was presented to the HOA at the beginning of this year. There were concerns expressed that the location of this structure should be located and meet the setback requirements of the Fishers UDO, which it does. We're actually at 24 feet from the property line at the closest point to this structure. And at the time that was presented regarding the height, that was the only concern that was presented. So with that, happy to answer any questions or concerns.
Thank you, Joy. At this time, I'd open the public hearing. Anyone from the public wish to speak on the variance related to the increase in the accessory structure height from 18 feet to 22 feet? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. And, excuse me, would you like to speak, ma'am? This is on the variance for the height of the structure.
There's two parts, so we'll also be hearing after this the variance for the use of it specifically. So this first part is a variance for just the exceeding the height of the structure. So separately, we will also hear the use of the structure. So if you have any comments regarding the height variance, now would be the time. But if your comments are more suited to the use of it, we can hear that next. Okay.
Okay. So just to be clear, we're talking about increasing the height of the structure from 18 to 22 feet, not for the use of the structure, the height of the structure. At this point, I do not see anyone here to speak on this from the public. Excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am, why don't you approach the podium and state your name and your address, please, okay? And I can explain to you what we're trying to accomplish here. Go ahead.
I'm Laura Villani. I live at 13575 East 114th Street.
Okay, we have two variances in front of us today, 14 and 15. 14 is just to increase the height of the structure from 18 to 22 feet. That's the only matter that we're reviewing in 14. In 15, which will be called after this one, we're talking about the use of the structure. So if you want to speak as to the height of the structure, you're more than welcome to do that. If you don't have any comments to that and you wish to speak as to the use of the structure, that'll be called next. Does that help you?
I understand.
Okay.
When the HOA reviewed this, one of our stipulations was as long as they complied with the, what do you call them? not the covenant, the Fisher standard. So I'm just curious why it is needed to have this extra 4 feet for the
Okay.
structure.
Is that so you're asking a question about why the additional height?
Why do they need the additional height to, which, I didn't really want to speak. Why they can't comply with the 18-foot limit that is currently a standard in Fishers? Why can't they just comply with that?
Okay, so that's one question. Do you
Correct.
have any other questions?
Just that,
Is that the only comment that you have, ma'am?
yes.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Joy, and Joy, perhaps you can answer that question for us?
Yeah, again, this variance was, the height of the structure was really just to match the existing architecture of the primary residence. I think at the time it was presented to the HOA, that the height of the building was shown. And I would agree that the commitments were that we would meet the UDO. But that was before we understood that there was this 18-foot height restriction. So that is the reason for the variance. The height that was presented on those plans, though, hasn't changed. So the HOA saw the 22-foot height.
Okay.
And Mr. McClure, I think, is also on here too, so he can step in if he presented to the HOA if I misrepresented that at all.
Okay.
No, Joy, you were accurate.
I'm sorry, I have a comment from someone, I don't know who's speaking. Could you identify yourself and your address, please?
Apologies. My name is Fred McClure. My address is 13511 East 114th Street, Fishers.
Okay.
And I am the subject property owner.
You're the owner. Okay, thank you, sir. And go ahead with your comment, sir. What was your comment?
Yes, just that Joy is correct. The drawings that were presented to the HOA did exceed the 18 foot, and I believe the original drawings were at 24 feet, and the current drawings are at 22 feet. So it was approved at the 24-foot mark by the HOA.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay. Any other folks from the public wish to speak on this issue, just the height of the structure? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and ask staff to present. Thank you.
Sorry, I went way too far back. Let's see. Okay, so this is one of those things where it probably would have been easier if I had like a 10-second briefing beforehand, but yes, so this is VA 2114. This is one of 2 variance requests this evening for this particular property and for the same project. So again, this first variance request is for development standards. Again, that is just for the overall height of the proposed structure. So this is a little hard to see, but the proposed structure is in I would say the upper third portion of this property. If you look at this aerial image, let me see if I can highlight it for you. So it would be approximately located in that area if you're looking at this image. So in the past, there was an older barn/garage structure here that was removed sometime between spring of 2019 and spring of 2020. And they're basically asking to put another structure in that same approximate location. And this is the structure that they're referring to as the carriage house. So in the city of Fishers, for a property zoned R2, which is what this property is zoned, we do have a maximum height for accessory structures of 18 feet. For certain other zones that are intended for larger properties, we do have higher limits than that. One of those zones is ER, or estate residential. So some lots in the same subdivision today are zoned estate residential. Most of them are zoned R2. There isn't really a great explanation for why that is, other than when we took over zoning from Noblesville, a majority of the area that Noblesville had translated to R2 for Fishers. We did have an opt-in period several years ago where people could request to rezone to estate residential, and some people did. Because this property could be zoned ER today, estate residential, it qualifies, for all the requirements that estate residential would set out. This height of 22 feet would be allowed under that zoning. Because of this, staff is supportive of the height variance. Again, because 22 feet would be allowed under estate residential, which this property could be zoned today if it were rezoned to that. Again, it's R2, it's single family, so the limit is 18 feet. However, we are supportive of the request to 22 feet just because it could be estate residential, and that is what would be allowed under that. Again, this is pertinent only to the height of the overall structure. So with that, as far as the development standards request is concerned, staff is supportive.
Thank you. Members of the board, any questions for staff or the petitioner? Seeing no questions at this point, do we have a motion?
I'd make a motion. Yeah. Okay. Make a motion that we approve VA-21-14 with the conditions that the variance be limited to the improvements as presented and discussed, and that the approval be recorded on the subject property.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Secretary, could you call a roll?
Mr. Grinsley,
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson,
Yes.
Mr. Fain,
Yes.
Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes. So the variance as to the height of the structure has passed. And next we'll move to the next request, which is case number VA 21-15, 13511 East 114th Street. Consideration of land use variance from the City of Fishers Unified Development Ordinance to allow the construction of a second dwelling unit on a one residential lot. The subject property is located at 13511 East 114th Street, Fishers, 46037, directly on Geist Reservoir within the Country Lane Estates subdivision, and is approximately 6.45 acres and zoned R2, residential. The petitioner again is Joy Skidmore on behalf of F&M Real Estate Office, LLC. Joy, would you please proceed with your petition for case number VA 21-15?
Yes, I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Can you all see this? Sorry, did you see this?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay. So once again, Joy Skidmore, PO Box 91, Plainfield, Indiana 46168. So the city's UDO only permits one dwelling unit per lot in this R2 district. And a dwelling unit is defined as any structure or portion thereof designed for or used for residential purposes as a self-sufficient or individual unit by one family or other social association of persons and having permanently installed sleeping, cooking, and sanitary facilities. So right here I have a screenshot of the floor plan that's in your packet, which you can see has restrooms, has kitchens, and the workshop and loft space in this building can be considered used for sleeping. And so that is the reason that we are here for the variance. However, the intent of this structure is to have the ability to entertain family and friends outdoors in the cooler months when it's too chilly to be by the reservoir, and it is not intended to be used as a residence or a home for anyone. And that is a commitment that was made when it was presented to the HOA. So again, these are the building elevations that were presented to the HOA, and at that time, earlier this year, the comments that were received was that the front porch needed to be smaller and that front entry needed to be simpler. They asked that the bedroom that was shown actually be modified to show what it's actually used for, which would be the workshop that was in the previous plan and storage space. And then there was an open air deck that was also proposed, and they asked that that be eliminated as well. So these are the plans that are submitted for building permit. So you can see the modifications that were made based on those comments from the HOA. The porch size was reduced. It was, I think, approximately 13 feet and is now maybe 7.5 to 8 feet. It was simplified. As mentioned before, the HOA asked that all of the setback requirements that are required by the UDO be met, and so they are with where the location of the structure is placed, or proposed location is placed. The open air deck, you can see, has been removed, and the bedroom is now labeled a workshop. And so based on those modifications, the owner received conditional approval upon a commitment that it will not be used as a residential rental or used as an additional residence. And since that time, no additional comments were received, and so they moved forward with getting building plans completed. So as part of the building plan submittal, that's where this variance of use came up, was that, hey, this has all of these components, but it's considered a residential use. Even though you're not going to use it for residential use, it does require a variance because all of the components are there. So I've listed here the staff report commitments that are suggested, and the owner has no objection to those commitments if this variance is approved. So no objection to those conditions being added. As Andrew mentioned, there was a previous structure that was located in pretty much the same exact location. So I think that's important to note. I think some of the concerns were based on the location of the structure, but there was a previous structure and Asphalt Drive in pretty much the same location where this was proposed. In addition, another important item to note, so I've shown the site plan here to the bottom left. And so the front elevation of this building and the main entrance, the main pedestrian entrance, is actually facing to the west. The rear elevation faces the east adjoiner and only has a small window that's in the bedroom and larger windows in the loft. And then the south side has the drive coming in as it was shown on the previous structure that was there before. So all of the activity that's going to go on and any hosting is really going to take place in the west side of this proposed structure. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns.
Thank you, Joy. At this point, I'd like to open the public hearing and invite anyone who wishes to speak as to case number BA-21-15, the consideration of a land use variance, use of the structure. Please approach the podium, state your name and address, and proceed.
Hello, my name's Donna Bond. I live right next door to Mr. McClure's home, 13555 East 114th Street.
Thank you.
My concern is that when our HOA discussed this and approved it, the structure was called a storage facility. And a storage facility, as far as I could imagine, and what this other structure that they were talking about that had already been on the property was merely for vehicles, like a tractor, lawnmower, that type of thing. So that was the original request. And then when it was approved by the HOA on those conditions, we were very grateful that those conditions were approved. And we didn't hear anything more about the project until we got a letter from Ms. Skidmore calling it a carriage house. And then the variance requests from the city were presented to us. And we were really taken aback because all of a sudden now it's a carriage house, which implies, in my mind, someone lives there. Mr. McClure has stated several times, no one will live there. However, that I think is really a hard type of commitment to make, especially if that house would be sold. And if that house would be sold, here's a beautiful guest cottage that could be rented out and not have anything to do with really family members in the neighborhood. And that really disturbs us. So basically, I know I submitted an email and talked about other concerns, safety concerns. We have no fences in the neighborhood, so we're directly accessible to any guests that might wander over. And we do have a pond that is deep and could be dangerous. So that's my point of view. Thank you, and I've really appreciated the cooperation of Andrew and Megan. Thank you.
And we do have your email with your concerns. The email that you sent was shared with the group today. This is an email from Jerry Bond dated Friday, April 23rd at 11:59 that was sent to Mr. McGee.
Right, I have that right here.
Yeah, we have seen that, and all of us have reviewed that. We got it earlier today, just so you know that we're aware of it,
Okay,
and we've had a chance to review it.
okay, great.
Okay?
I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bond. Would anyone else like to approach the podium and speak as to this matter?
How are you doing? My name is Jeff Gerbers. I live at 13595 East 114th Street. A couple things I want to do as far as clarification here. I'm trying to still understand this because while we did have a Zoom call on this originally, things have changed. And again, it was presented to us as a storage unit rather than a dwelling. One of the things that we have at Country Lane is we do have covenants. And in these covenants, we have a thing that says you can only have one dwelling per property. And in order to override that, we have to have a vote of 7 of 10, and that has not been done. This has not been approved by the HOA. This was approved by the HOA architectural group, which included only 3 people, plus the neighbor. So it did not pass the 7 of 10. It hasn't been up to a vote yet. We actually have our meeting coming up this Sunday. My suggestion would be to at least continue this to a point for us to discuss this, because this is what the future is going to be for some of our other lots that are out there too. We have approximately 60 plus acres out there between the 9 houses. And so we are really concerned about what's going to be there going forward. My, again, suggestion is, since the time, Fisher's does not allow 2 dwellings on one property. And now we have come to believe that this is a dwelling, and we don't approve it either. But we still want to have a discussion on this thing, and rather than saying it's approved by the HOA, it is not. The Architecture Committee only.
Sir, as to that, sir, we are an independent body with the city of Fishers to consider a use variance from the current standards. So what we decide today is for the city of Fishers. We don't have any impact on your HOA. So your HOA acts independent of us. We're here to consider the variance, the use variance for the property. Now, what we do here today is binding on the city of Fishers, not necessarily your HOA. So it's a different body. They make different decisions than we do. Just, I wanted you to be aware of that.
Okay, I just want you to be aware that while they're saying it's an HOA approved, it's not an HOA approved.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to approach the podium and speak as to this topic?
Laura Villani, 13575 East 114th Street. I just want to make sure you got my email in your packet and read it.
Ma'am, we have an email from you on Friday at 1 o'clock to Mr. McGee.
Yes.
And we are aware of that, 13575 East 114th.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you have read that.
Yes, yes,
I'm better in writing than I am verbal.
Thank you, thank you. Any other members of the public wish to approach the podium and speak as to this topic? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask staff to present.
So as Joy stated earlier, the city of Fishers, we received an application for this structure. We basically put it on hold because we let them know that this structure has all of the qualities of a separate dwelling unit. And since we don't allow a secondary dwelling unit, we could not approve it as it was. The owner informed us that they did not intend it to use it as such. And so by going to this variance process, the owner is not necessarily seeking to have a secondary dwelling unit, but to clarify the use of the structure, and again, potentially agree to any commitments that would limit their use of it as a secondary dwelling unit. This variance process is really our way to move forward, potentially, with the structure, even though it does have those facilities as described. One of the commitments that we had mentioned, or that Joy had mentioned, these commitments, these are what we would recommend if the board were inclined to approve. One of the commitments states that this dwelling unit is not rented out for profit. One of them, we would recommend that the unit would have the same address as the existing unit. Again, to help not make it a secondary unit. We would also recommend a commitment that the dwelling unit is only used by the existing or the current property owners of this property, or their guests potentially. And one of the kind of the overarching, or one of our typical commitment recommendations is that this is recorded to the property. And we would ask that it also, by recording all of these things, as one of the neighbors spoke to earlier, this would not only be limited to the current owner, but anyone that buys this property. So these commitments would be recorded on the property, and anyone going forward, unless they sought another variance, would have to abide by these commitments. That's the way that we would protect the use of this property, even if the owner changed hands. So I just wanted to clarify that if the current owner were to sell, if these commitments were recorded, then any future user or anybody that has to buy this property, this should show up in their title work when they're doing the purchase process, and they would have to be aware of this, and they would have to abide by those commitments. So just wanted to clarify that. And then another clarification again, yes, there was an HOA meeting, as I understood, that approved this architecture of the building. And there seems to have been a little confusion over the details of the use of it as far as whether or not that was approved. And it is, again, my understanding that there will be a meeting shortly with the HOA to discuss the approval of the use of the structure. So again, as you did earlier, I just wanted to, as staff, reiterate that this is purely as the City of Fishers is concerned, and we would not override or otherwise nullify any private HOA agreements. So staff does not have a recommendation for approval or denial for this. We just wanted to make sure everything was presented clearly to you, and ask that if you are inclined to approve the request, those are some conditions to consider, but by all means are not necessarily the only conditions to consider.
Thank you. Members of the board, do you have questions for the petitioner or for staff?
I've got one. The idea about the bedroom being used as a workshop, how is that verified?
Like from the city standpoint, or?
Yeah.
And so we really wouldn't be able to go out there proactively and make sure that the use of it is not as a bedroom, or that the use of it is a workshop. That would really come down to if we received a complaint or some sort of public feedback that said, hey, we don't think they're abiding by either a commitment, or we think they're not using it as intended. So the use of a room, we can't necessarily dictate that room is only going to be used as a workshop. We really couldn't do that. But as far as the commitments, making a commitment that it not be a dwelling unit, or that it not, that, I guess there's a limit to what we can limit. So if they're breaking a commitment and we got a complaint regarding that, we could investigate that. But we can't necessarily, I can't think of a way that we would ever be able to know exactly what each room is being used for.
Yeah, the only way we'd be able to catch that is during the building permit review. So typically when a building permit is submitted, we see plans such as these, and the rooms are labeled, because if it is a bedroom, there's different building code standards that have to be met with that bedroom. So we would catch it at that point. but, have someone uses it after construction and after our inspectors have inspected it at that point, is a little bit harder to enforce.
So, but you'll keep an eye out for that permit coming through?
Yes, as always. And again, that's how, this ended up here in the first place, was looking at the plans and seeing the facilities that were in the current structure as being proposed, so.
I have a question for staff, and this might be a question for Joy too. Is there a driveway or asphalt that leads to this structure?
Yes, there is.
There is, okay. And does the structure have a garage? Or a garage door?
Yes.
And what elevation is the garage? Is that the
So that would be the south elevation.
south elevation?
Yes,
Okay.
yep. So the west elevation is where the man door is, I guess you could call it. The south elevation is the garage door. And on the site plan, it's a little hard to see, but on the enlargement to the right, you can see where the drive would come up to meet the garage door on the south side of the structure.
Thank you. Other questions from the board?
Yeah, I guess I have a question for staff, and it's tied into one of the public comments we received, and also tied into the commitments that the staff is suggesting we consider if the board was inclined to approve this. And it relates to the recommendation that the unit will not be rented out for profit. But I guess I have concerns regarding, let's say if guests stay for an extended period of time, and that extended period of time is subjective, obviously, but has the staff thought about that issue regarding the extended period of time of use of that unit by guests, let's say for a month or so?
That is something that we have thought about, and really, I guess I can't say that I came up with a good way to tackle that necessarily. I'm not sure what legal precedent there is on putting a time limit per year or per month on maybe occupancy of the structure. I don't know, is there precedent for that at all, or?
You're free to tie whatever conditions or restrictions you want with an approval. Your problem's not going to be in the restrictions that you place on it. Your problem's going to be in enforcement of those restrictions and how you tell how long somebody has been there. So there's no precedent that says you can't restrict the length of time that a guest stays there. You have an enforcement issue.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the intent of that commitment, and again, if the board were to approve, maybe there is a different wording that you would prefer. The intent of that is, again, as Ross and the audience stated, rental for profit. So whether long-term rental, exactly renting it out as an income property, someone not related or not known, or even if they are known, again, renting it out under a lease or a short-term rental like an Airbnb. We intended that commitment would include all of those situations where it would be rented out for either a money-making operation or to sublet, or to have, essentially an income property. So any short or long-term rentals, that commitment was intended to cover. Again, if the board wishes to be more explicit in stating what that commitment is, that's definitely your option. But that's what staff was recommending.
I guess I'm still confused on a couple of points. And one being the bedroom. I mean, if there's not going to be a bedroom there, it's going to be hard for people to stay, right? And the other one is the garage. I don't get it all. If nobody's living there, why do you need a garage? Anybody?
Petitioner, could you speak to Mr. Fain's question about if no one is going to be living there, why there would need to be a garage in this facility, this accessory structure?
So this is Fred McClure, and I am the property owner. The intent for the garage, and the garage is not large enough for a full-size vehicle. The intent for the garage is to store a gator right? And as well as lawn equipment, so that we will be able to use that to store for yard maintenance and other activities that we would do out in our yard, right, and on our property. We have almost 7 acres, and that's an important piece for us right now that is currently taking up our real garage space that we would like to be able to alleviate.
Sir, I'm not sure I heard you correctly. Just if I could summarize what you said, the garage door is not a full-size garage door capable of a vehicle pulling through? It's a size for a gator?
The garage area is not sized for a full-size garage, like a full one-car garage. It is intended to be used to store a gator and lawn equipment.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
It is a little hard to read on there. I did look at these closer, and yes, the garage is approximately 10 to 11 feet deep and approximately 20 feet wide. So you wouldn't be able to pull a car in because the car would have to be sideways, and that you wouldn't be able to do that. So it is hard to see on there, but yes, the garage is really like a half size garage or half depth.
Kitchen. Okay. Members of the board, any other questions for the petitioner or for staff? Okay. Having no other questions, do we have a motion?
This is a tough one for me, but I would make a motion that we deny VA-21-15.
Second.
Secretary, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Grinslade,
No.
Mr. Stevenson,
No.
Yeah, I think you got that backwards, Gary.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Yes to deny.
Thank you. Yes.
Did he want to change the vote?
Well, would I ask you to please call the roll again, Secretary?
I'll start over.
Thank you.
Mr. Grinslade,
I'm sorry, I guess I'm confused. What are we?
The motion is to deny the petition. If you, okay, thank you.
and Mr. Stevenson,
Yes.
and Mr. Fain,
Yes.
and Mr. Ferrucci.
I would say no, but the motion carries as a denial. Okay. Our next order of business is case number.
I'm sorry, can you please provide some explanation as to why the denial was approved?
There will be a findings of fact issued, but the decision of the board is based upon the facts that have been presented here at the hearing. At the conclusion of this hearing, we will issue findings of fact that the board members will sign. Those findings of fact will be available to you and actually provided to you, Mr. McClure, by the board. And then you will have the reasoning of the board in those findings of fact. But for now, you'll know that the reasoning is just based upon what the board heard at hearing tonight. And the reasoning will be in the findings of fact that they issue. And those findings of fact, or that decision, by the way, is then appealable by you. You have a 30-day appeal time to appeal the decision if you choose to do so. And that appeal is to the Circuit Court of Hamilton County.
And is that 30 days from today, or is that 30 days from the date that I receive the findings of fact?
It's the date you receive the findings of fact.
And what is the expectation on what that date will be?
Those get sent to the secretary of the board this evening, and as soon as the board members sign them and issue them, then you'll receive a copy of those.
Sir, that typically happens within a week. So you would expect a finding of facts sometime within the next week.
And then we'll also receive direction or instruction on how we appeal those as well at that time?
You do not receive direction on how to appeal those. That is legal work that we suggest you hire legal counsel for to continue and discuss your rights with respect to that.
Is that 30 days specifically identified in that communication?
It is not. That is your right, and it is your recommendation that you hire counsel.
Okay, and so for Hamilton County, is there a specific reference that you can provide for me for those requirements?
Fred, I can provide all of that to you.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to move on to the next order of business. This is Kate's VA 21-16 Mattingly Flower Market. I understand that's been continued to May. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. We will continue that to May. Our last order of business this evening is case VA 21-17, First Merchants Bank ATM. Consideration of a variance of use in development standards from the city's UDO to allow for a standalone bank ATM and associated site improvements at 7272 Fishers Crossing Drive, generally located in the southwest corner of the retail parking lot by the 116th Street and Fishers Crossing Drive. Our petitioner is Scott Clark, Director of Construction Management for First Merchants. Mr. Clark, are you here or on the line, please?
Yes, I'm online here. This is Scott Clark, 200 East Jackson, Muncie, Indiana, and representing First Merchants Bank. We're seeking a variance there to put an ATM kiosk with a full functioning ATM over in that southwest corner of the Kroger parking lot, and to be able to serve our customers in that area. We did check with the city, and the parking requirements there, the requirements are 337, and I believe the lot has got 404 in there now. So we will be removing just a few up in that area, possibly like 10 to 12 spots possibly there. And then also we have also been requested to put in some noise variance trees up in the, I believe it's the northwest corner there up against the neighborhood. And we would be willing to do those at the whatever type of tree is needed for that area. So if you've got any questions, we can take those now. I also have our contractor on the line here as well, if there's any specific questions to the structure.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. At this time, I'd like to open the matter to public hearing. If anyone is here for the public and wish to speak as to variance VA 21-17, please approach the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and like to hear from staff, please.
All right, hello, board. This is Jonah Butler, a new planner here with the City of Fishers. Again, this is VA 21-17, petitioner Scott Clark on behalf of First Merchants Bank. The parcel is currently zoned C3 commercial, and the existing land use is retail and parking lot. So the petitioner is seeking a variance from for land use and development standards. The UDO defines ATMs as an accessory structure. This is impractical, and as such, they're seeking a variance of land use to allow for such accessory structure to stand by itself on this lot. They're also seeking a variance of development standards to allow for architectural and parking standards to not apply. As we discussed before, the plans call for 10 to 12 parking spaces to be removed, which will still allow for the Kroger retail and ATM to have ample parking per UDO standards. This is the location at 7272 Fishers Crossing Drive, just north of 116th Street on the western end of East 116th Street. Here's a little snippet of the construction plans for the ATM itself, and then on the right there is where the ATM would be located, also showing what parking spaces would be removed. They are the farthest parking spaces away from the entrance of any of the retail stores. We did receive one public comment. A resident abutting the Kroger retail property has expressed concern regarding the increase in traffic and noise generated on site potentially by this project. Staff has been on site, and these are pictures from the corner where the property owner's property abuts that of the Kroger property. You cannot see it in the pictures. However, there is a fence and ample tree screening there.
Should the board deem it necessary, staff suggests approval with the condition that a minimum of 3 trees are planted at the identified location, the northwest corner of the Kroger property. So our overall staff recommendation is approval with conditions.
Thank you. Members of the board, any questions? No questions? Do we have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve VA 21-17 as presented.
Second that motion?
We have a motion and a second. Secretary, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Grinsley,
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson,
Yes.
Mr. Fain,
Yes.
and Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. At this time, we have no other matters scheduled. And we'd asked, are there any new business before the board?
Yes, so we do have some announcements just from our department. Want to keep you guys all up to date. So Tony Bagato, the Director of Planning and Zoning, his last day was last Friday. And with his departure, I have been named the Director of Planning and Zoning moving forward. Ross Hillary, who's in the audience, will be the Assistant Director for our department. And then also, as you just met, Jonah Butler is a new planner as well. So lots of changes there, but just wanted to keep you guys informed and looking forward to continuing to work with you guys.
Thank you, and congratulations to you all.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Wish you much success. Thank you very much. Okay, any other new business? Okay, this time I make a motion to close the hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you.